Welcome to the Modern Arizona Podcast. We share the stories of people whose lives are shaped by the legal system in Arizona and beyond. Each episode blends real experiences, expert insights, and practical guidance to give you a deeper understanding of the law and its impact on everyday life.
Hello and welcome to the Modern Arizona Podcast. I'm your host, Billie Tarascio, joined today by Ruby Becker, attorney with Modern Law, and we're going to be talking all about juvenile law. Ruby is our practice group leader for juvenile law and has substantial juvenile law experience. Welcome to the show, Ruby.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So first, before we get started, explain what is juvenile law?
Juvenile law encompasses a couple of different areas. When people think juvenile law, they automatically think juvenile criminal law, delinquency. That's not normally what I deal with. There's the other side of juvenile law that has to do with dependency, termination, and guardianship. And that primarily has to do with when the child welfare gets involved in Arizona. Here it's called the Department of Child Safety, or DCS. There's also the private end of it where an individual can file either a private dependency, private termination, private guardianship as a party against another party. So my experience generally has been in working for one of a few counties in Arizona representing parents or children in dependency cases where the Department of Child Safety has taken custody of a child. But I also have experience in representing parents or grandparents when they file dependency, termination, or guardianship cases against another parent. And so what the juvenile court is all about in the non-delinquency part, let's call it that, that has to do with protecting a parent's constitutional right to parent their children.
Yeah, so DCS has come in and they've accused you of all sorts of things and they've taken your child away. You can represent those parents and help protect their rights.
Correct.
Okay, wonderful. And how have you worked? You said you'd worked for several different counties. What were your role?
When I was in Pima County, I primarily represented parents. However, I did represent children who were the subject matter of dependency cases also. That's the really nice thing about juvenile court and dependency cases that's very different from family court is that juveniles have a voice in juvenile court. They have an attorney who represents them. They get to come to court. They get to talk to the judge directly. This is a case that's all about them. They have a voice in what goes on.
That's crazy. So they're hearing about all the things that their parents have allegedly done to them.
Right.
Oh, so as a family law attorney, that just makes my skin crawl because we normally try to protect kids from all of that in family law. But I can certainly see the advantages. We're talking about their lives, and they're usually placed in foster care, right? If that's happening.
Unfortunately, far too often, even when there is a good family placement, they end up in foster cares, in group homes, in inpatient facilities. One of the most terrifying things that I experienced, especially in Pima County, was the ability of a child welfare agency to put a child in inpatient treatment and leave them there for months at a time without a hearing to see if this was an appropriate continued placement. Luckily, there has been some change in the law. They have to have hearings every 72 hours for inpatient treatment of children. But I recall a specific case where a child was in inpatient treatment for over 3 months with no hearing and no ability to speak to their parents, to have a doctor come into court and say whether this child even needed to. The Department of Child Safety just essentially ignored that the child was in inpatient treatment. The case manager never reached out to the child to determine if they needed to be moved. It was out of sight, out of mind.
Right.
And it's a very scary thing for a child.
Absolutely. Ruby, why is it that when there are families available for placement, children are still ending up in foster care or group homes?
My favorite line from DCS, and when I say favorite, I'm being very sarcastic. Uh, the family is not aligned with DCS, which means they don't believe that the parents did the things that DCS is alleging.
But is that a valid reason?
No, it's not. And unfortunately, there are not enough attorneys who push back on that and fight against that in court. And more attorneys need to speak up and say that's not the law.
Okay. So
It's not even DCS policy.
right. And nor could it be really, right? They don't agree with us, so but that's the reality. Okay, so when you push back and you're talking to a juvenile court judge, what happens when you, on behalf of a child or on behalf of a parent, contest a placement?
When you contest a placement, and normally what I would do is file a motion for change of placement to a family member. You can have whole full evidentiary hearing and have the individual who you're asking for placement with testify. And
Excellent.
as long as they don't have a criminal history, and even then, if it's some misdemeanor thing, something not related to the safety of a child, it's not really an issue. And you can believe that, a child thinks that something happened or somebody else thinks that something happened to a child and still support that that child should be with the parent or should be with family. And that's really the underlying issue with they're not aligned with DCS is that oh, people question the government so they don't get placement. It's really frustrating. Um, in about 95% of the cases, the judge will order placement with that person. And that's why I say it's a problem that attorneys don't push back, is because if the judge doesn't have all the facts, doesn't understand the complete situation, they're just going to go with whatever DCS is asking.
Okay, so I want to talk about this situation. Let's say I'm a relative, I'm a family member, I'm not a party to the case, I have no representation. Can I come hire you and ask to become an intervener and ask for that hearing to then have children placed in my house?
Absolutely. Yes. And that's one of the cool things about juvenile court too. The biggest hurdle for that would be, and one of the things the courts consider in intervention, especially for family members requesting placement, is whether their interests can be represented by another party who is already party to a case. So let's say I am the sister of mom and
Hmm.
I want placement with me. DCS says I'm not aligned with DCS.
Hmm. Hmm.
The best course would be for mom's attorney to file a motion for change of placement. That's if mom agrees that I would be the best placement.
Sure.
So normally, what I would do in that situation is probably reach out to mom's attorney and see if mom supports the placement. If mom
Hmm.
does support the placement, then instead of filing a motion to intervene, I would work with mom's attorney to
Hmm.
actually get that motion for change of placement filed.
Hmm.
I know that county attorneys, the government attorneys, public defenders can be really overwhelmed, and that's a lot more work for them to do. So I'm sure they would be glad for the help to help file that motion and get that done. If mom wasn't in agreement with placement, that would be the time to file a motion to intervene because the interests are not aligned. You don't have another party who has those same interests as you.
Okay, thank you for explaining that. And then you mentioned guardianships. I hardly ever see that. When do people file for guardianship in juvenile court?
Guardianship normally occurs after a period of dependency has gone on. Statutorily, depending on the age of a child, can be anywhere from 6 months to 15 months, where you move on from the phase of dependency to a permanent placement of a child. So, under Title 8 in juvenile law, they're called permanent guardianships. Now, they can be undone, but it's not as easy as temporary guardianships where a parent just withdraws their consent for it. In a permanent guardianship, the parent would have to go back to court and prove to the court that there's a substantial change in circumstance for them to be able to have their children back from the guardian. Um, in Pima County, and I really hope one day Maricopa County does this, there was something called a dependency alternative program. So instead of a child going into the court system, being in DCS, what would happen is that on a set day during the week, those cases that maybe there was an alternative, say a change in custody and family court, there is a family member who is willing to do a guardianship, we would right away start the petition for permanent guardianship then. So it can be done prior to a dependency being filed. If you have a family member who is ready and willing to take the kids, give time for the parent to get their stuff together and not have the kids in the system. That is a perfect alternative than throwing a kid into the welfare system or having court oversight and DCS in everybody's life.
Oh, that is such a good point.
My thing is always the less government intervention, the better.
Okay, so usually when people come to me, they're third party and they say nobody can take care of my nephew. The dad's out of the picture. He lives in, wherever. Mom is currently homeless and on drugs. What do I do? I might mention to them third party rights or private dependency, but the third option would be they could file in juvenile court for permanent guardianship, not temporary.
Right. So there's the difference. The temporary requires the consent of both parents.
Okay.
So that's what's kind of nice about Title VIII is that the permanent guardianship is that you don't have to have the consent of both parents. If you do, makes it much quicker.
Got it.
And you don't maybe have dad popping up just deciding he's going to dissolve the guardianship at a whim, or mom saying, maybe you have a parent who is an addict. They're not quite sober yet, but they can pop up and dissolve the guardianship. And
Right.
a permanent one is more stability.
Mm-hmm.
However, to prove in court that this is what's best for the child, that is the standard of clear and convincing evidence. So it's a little bit harder unless you have the consents. The other issue is that if a child is over 12 years old, they also have to consent to the guardianship. So you have that element of it. But a Title VIII, I think, is better. And if you have a parent who isn't present, say dad, and mom is homeless and she thinks that this is best, she can consent to it, it can be a relatively quick process.
Okay. And then if you do it that way, if you're doing a guardianship, you don't have a dependency and you don't have any terminations, right, of parental rights.
Right. And a lot of things that a big part of guardianship that's nice is you still have those parental rights intact. We also used to do MOUs or memorandums of understanding and file those with guardianships that you can do a whole parenting time plan attached to those too. So the parent is really involved, but you have a family member who has the legal authority to take the kids to the doctor, hold them in school. But the parent is still very much involved. They're just not in a place where they are able to be a legal parent to the child.
That is so interesting. When there are dependency cases, do they have the opportunity to resolve the dependency cases with a permanent guardianship and leave the parental rights intact?
Yes. So a permanent guardianship never terminates the rights to parents.
And how often does DCS do that?
Normally, it depends on whether that family member is agreeable to the guardianship. That's the goal. That is always the goal over termination.
Okay.
If it is a family member, it's always the goal to have a permanent guardianship over a termination. Because you never know in 2 years, in 5 years.
Yeah.
If the parent is, in a much better place, it's always best for the parent to be the one who's raising the child or be in their lives.
Well, and we've seen this where we've had clients who've come into the office who've said my rights were terminated 10 years ago. My daughter is living with me.
Yeah.
I am her parent. We are a family. How can I legally get my rights back? What's the answer?
The answer to that is you have to adopt your kid. I know. It's crazy, but that is the only way to do it. You actually have to adopt your own child.
Are you eligible for adoption if you have a termination on your record?
Um, not through DCS.
So what does that mean? We're doing a private adoption where we're giving notice to the dad doesn't object, and then it just kind of goes through, like, quietly?
Yes, basically.
DCS is never involved.
Right. If you have
Okay.
DCS involved, it's a lot harder to do. So I have had cases where there was somebody who had been a foster parent who then adopted, and then they don't want the kids anymore.
Right. It happens a lot.
Yeah. So then a dependency case is opened. And you know who they tried to place those kids with? The biological parents whose rights they terminated. And they do, and it happens often. And in those circumstances, they become their permanent guardians and not readopt them. I know.
Juvenile law is messy.
It's very messy.
Do you prefer it over family law?
I feel like it's more rewarding at times.
Mhm.
And maybe it's just the part of me that's, the libertarian part of me that hates big government and hates
Right, that, like, there's a bad guy, right? There's a bad guy in juvenile court, and it's the government, and it's the agency, and then in family court, you just have the mom and dad.
I feel like juvenile law is a little more rewarding and, fighting the big guy.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, and what percentage of your practice would you say is juvenile law?
Currently, I think is probably 25 to 30%,
Mhm. Okay. And, ideally, how much would you wanna do in juvenile court versus family court?
like 80%.
Got it. Okay. All right. Good to know. Good to know. What else? What else should people know about juvenile court?
So I think people don't understand their rights from the very start. And this is what's really important. DCS has no right to come into your home. You do not have to allow DCS into your home. You have a right to have an attorney present when DCS is doing their investigation. You should have an attorney present when DCS is doing their investigation. I know it's going to shock people, but DCS lies about a lot of stuff. And if you don't have somebody there, you're not recording the interview, you don't have an attorney present, they can lie about whatever you said, whatever they saw, whatever the circumstances were. This is driven by money. It is. DCS gets a lot of federal funding for every child that they take into the welfare system.
Wow.
And and so if people understood their rights, the rights of parents is a constitutionally protected right. You have the right to the care, custody, and control of your children. And the only way that the government can come in and interrupt that is if they can make a determination that a child is being abused or neglected. And so it's really important to protect your rights from the investigation.
Okay. So if a parent is contacted and it's, either they show up at their door, what should the parent say?
First of all, don't let them into your house. You are not required to do so. I don't think it does any harm to, but again, you never know if DCS is gonna lie. You don't know what the objective is. You don't know what the reporter has told them. You don't know what they're going to believe. And they also work with something called OCWI. So that's the Office of Child Welfare Investigations. They're like, colloquially, we call them like the rent-a-cops of DCS.
Yeah, because they're quasi cops, right? They're quasi criminal, but they're not really cops.
Exactly. So they get away with not telling you that you can have an attorney present, you can invoke your rights, but they're doing an investigation for law enforcement.
Mhm,
And anything
mhm,
you say
mhm.
and it will be held against you.
So can you say, I'd like to schedule a time when my attorney can be present for this interview? And what do we anticipate their response to be to that?
Now they've been forewarned a little more. DCS, I see that their policy has changed a little more, that they do tell people you can have an attorney present.
Okay.
Just, in the piece of paper that they hand to you, they never tell you outright that you can. But that would be my advice. DCS comes to your door, wants to do an investigation. You say, sure, great. I'm going to reach out to my attorney. Let's schedule a time that works.
And do you have the attorney schedule the time with the caseworker?
No, you can schedule it with the
Okay.
caseworker. Generally, DCS caseworkers will not talk to the attorney because they are represented by the Attorney General's office.
Okay. Okay. Good to know. All right. So lawyers can't talk to caseworkers because they're represented parties.
They cannot. So
Huh.
during that interview, during the investigation, I will sit there during an investigation taking notes. I cannot talk directly to the investigator. I will tell my client to ask a question to ask the investigator because you can't. I mean, that's against our ethics because they're a representative party.
Very interesting. And don't they have the right to interview children without parental consent and parents being there?
They do, and that's the concerning thing is they don't have to tell you. They can show up to your kid's school. The school has to let them talk to the kids, and you may never know that they talk to your child.
So can the children request having an attorney present?
They should. They
Okay.
can, and they should.
Okay.
Unless, I'm not going to say that there aren't cases that are justified for the children.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
The
But
child
it's
is being abused. Go ahead and talk to that person and report that to that person. But they do twist things that kids say too. I've had, like I said, I represented kids too, and they will say, I never told the investigator that. So it's not a bad idea for children to have their own attorney. And as I said, in juvenile cases, children have attorneys. They are a party to the case, they have representation.
if a child is being abused, but they don't want to go into state custody, how can they protect themselves?
I think the best course of action is to find a family member who they can trust and have that family member reach out to a lawyer to file a private dependency. That way the welfare system does not get involved because it is a genuine fear, and it's
Right.
not unfounded fear because I will tell you a lot of these kids are a lot better off being in a home with a parent who might be abusing them than to what happens to some of these kids in foster care. I I will say about 80% of the cases that I handled, the children who went into foster care were physically abused, were sexually abused. I've had children die in group homes from drug overdoses. And it is absolutely traumatizing for these parents who, maybe you have a parent who, and this is the most common one. You have parents with substance abuse issues. They take the kids away, they put them in foster care. The kids are completely traumatized. They really didn't need to take the kids from those parents.
Yeah. So the kids are running away and then they're getting in trouble and then they're put in a group home and then they're preyed upon by
Yeah.
predators that are either other kids in the home or adults who are hanging around. I'm sure you heard about the recent case of the 16-year-old found murdered.
Oh,
Did you?
this happens recent, sure. It happens on a weekly basis. When I was practicing in Maricopa County and there was a teenager in a group home on the case, went AWOL. They could be gone for 2, 3 years. DCS never finds them. Maybe they do find them. They find them because they picked them up for prostitution because they were being trapped.
Oh, Yeah, yeah, and in this recent case, I wish I remembered her name. So she was a pregnant 16-year-old, and she was killed by the 36-year-old man who is the father, who was preying on her and other girls in the same group home.
That
So,
doesn't shock me at all.
I mean, but, like, it really does beg the question for children who are not getting their needs met at home. You know, they're being abused, they're being neglected, there's not enough food, like, how are they supposed to protect themselves? And what I'm hearing from you is they have to start gathering their resources and find a trustworthy adult and kinda take matters of their protection into their own hands.
And I would say normally, if there is a school counselor, but they're mandated reporters, so they'll reach out to child welfare if that's reported to them. Another alternative, I think, houses of worship, whatever religion you are, I think churches are a great resource. There's a lot of youth pastors and individuals like that who will help, who are not necessarily mandated reporters.
Interesting. Okay, let's talk about the mandatory reporting laws. Who do they apply to?
So they apply to teachers, school counselors, therapists, doctors, nurses. So anybody who really comes in contact with children who that sort of thing might be reported to.
But not necessarily youth pastors.
So and I will say it's kind of similar to attorney-client privilege, right? You have your,
Clergy penitent privilege.
right,
Is that what it's called?
it's a harder label to put it on.
Yeah.
Right, so you do have that where they can say, "This was something told to me in confidence. I am not required."
Yeah, I
That's
see.
voice,
Mhm, mhm.
where
Wonderful.
teachers are required
Right.
for it.
Yeah. Ruby, thank you so much for coming on today and educating me and educating everybody else and for fighting the good fight. I really appreciate you. Anything else you think people need to know before we wrap up today?
Know your rights. It is the most important thing, is know your rights, and we have that big, beautiful piece of paper, the Constitution. And as parents, we are very protected by the Constitution. And if you have any question about your rights, we are a great resource for you.
Mhm.
We have some great attorneys who work in the juvenile field, and we are happy to help.
Okay, I lied. I have one other question because parents have this constitutional right to raise their children. This comes up from non-custodial parents all the time who wonder, why can family court take away my right to parent? They haven't necessarily found me abusive. They haven't necessarily found me neglectful. They just like the other parent better or they don't agree with the way I'm parenting. What about my constitutional right?
So and that is, it depends, is my answer. I'm going to give the law school answer because I don't know that a family court really does that. Because even when there is say you have temporary suspension of parenting time, there's always a way to modify it in family court where it's not the same thing in juvenile
Mm.
court. If you terminate a parent's rights,
Hmm.
there's no going back from that.
Hmm.
There is always a possibility of modification in family court.
And that's what prevents it from being a constitutional violation?
Right.
Got it.
And I would say, and I do argue that
Yeah.
do family court too, that some of the decisions that they make, the rulings that they make is a violation. And I think that that's made a little bit of an impact. So I think if family court attorneys kind of stuck to that a little more, maybe we could make a little bit of headway for judges. But a lot of judges have not practiced in juvenile court either, and so
Mhm.
they haven't seen that side of it, that full understanding of how important that constitutional protection is. They just hear 2 parents fighting over their kids.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it, and we will talk with you soon.
Thank you, Billy.
Thanks so much for listening to the Modern Arizona podcast. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, make sure to download it, like it, leave a review, and share it with your friends. If you know someone who would be a good guest or you would like to be on the Modern Arizona podcast, make sure to give us an email or reach out to us at mymodernlaw.com.